to adjudicate the inflation that we're seeing here, moving from what Forbes called an easy monetary policy to a tightening policy. What role does the Fed play in all of this? And do you think that that tinkering will make an effect that working people can feel?
The Fed hopes so. I'm dubious. The Fed hopes that it can slowly, steadily raise the interest rates so it only has the effect they want, which is to slow the inflation. By the way, that's the most they can reasonably hope for. Doing away with the inflation? Nah. Doing away with the reality that the inflation of price of goods is going up way faster than the wages people have to pay with? Yeah. And that these workers who are falling behind can't borrow because they're already in up to their ears in the debts of this horrible reality. They know they can't fundamentally change, but they want to slow the inflation because it is weakening the American economy. People have to understand, if the prices go up in this country, then everyone in the world, Americans included, have an incentive to shift from buying the higher price American goods to buying the less increased prices of other countries' goods. The United States is already maintaining an unsustainable imbalance in its trade, and this will make this much worse. So they have to do something, which is why the Fed is acting. Here's their terrible fear, which they should indeed think about. At some point when you raise interest rates, maybe not the first quarter point, maybe not even the first 2/3 of a point, but eventually it's going to impact people. They're not going to buy a new car because the higher the interest, the higher the monthly payment for the same car, right? This is too much. They're not going to buy homes. We're already seeing a decline in home sales in this country.
And who does that leave open to buy the homes but the banks, who are buying up the entire Sun Belt and then trying to rent them back to you at an enormous rent?
Yeah, we've let the top 2-3% become very wealthy. They take their money and give it to a hedge fund. The hedge fund then buys the houses of all the people who can't afford a home because such a large part of the wealth was given to the wealthy. I mean, the horror of it, the injustice of it, the deepening inequality that all of this attests to, that is going to shape our future more than anything that happens in Ukraine. I mean, and that reality should be governing what the media are doing, but they much prefer to beat up on Putin some more and to beat up on the Russians. That isn't that hard to do, given the way they behave, but nonetheless, it doesn't solve the problems that we're talking about. And my fear is that the Fed, in its urgent rush to control the inflation, will provoke a decline in the economy because the jobs won't be there to produce the goods because the mass of people can't buy the goods or are switching to imported goods from abroad. I mean, you put all of these pieces together, and we should be talking about the crisis of the U.S. economy, the inequality getting worse here, the anger and the bitterness of our people, the social divisions that flow from that. I mean, these are the issues that are going to shape our lives. And when the hoop-de-doodle over a war, 10,000 miles or whatever it is, 5,000 miles away, passes, as it will, as it already is, then we're going to be back to the real stark realities of our lives here.
Did you notice that COVID ended on February 24th when the war started? It was like the coverage of COVID ended. The mask mandates are all done, even in the blue states. Like everything's done with COVID now that we're sanctions deep into the war in the Ukraine.
It's a wonderful way to take off the focus on that, on the inadequacy. I mean, the United States remains the country with 4.5% of the world's people and 16 to 17% of the world's deaths from COVID. We failed as an economic system, as a medical system, to protect our people, which is one of the most fundamental things any economic system is measured by. And we didn't come out real well. And by the way, China is full of the news of a new strain and what that country is doing.
Right.
In Europe, I have my family is partly French, and I have an email this morning of people who are very worried in France about the surging new variant that's there. Everyone knows that if it's in France and if it's in China, it'll be in New York and in LA within days.
And meanwhile,
where's the preparation?
Where's the preparation? They're taking the masks off the kids this week at the school where my daughter is. And everyone seems to be like, hooray, it's fine. We're finally free of these social constraints. My kid's not wearing a mask on the bus. And it's not, that I don't want to get into that masking issue because it's tough, but it does seem like, it's not as simple as one might seem to say. One parent is like, well, if you want your kid to wear a mask, just tell them to wear a mask. I'm like, oh yeah, because kids follow what their parents say to the T. They don't care about peer pressure and have their own social, give me a break. This is insane. Anyway, Professor Wolff, when we first started this interview, before we hit the record button, you were I was like, oh my gosh, we're facing the end of this is oblivion. And sometimes when we were talking, I was picturing like, well, what could, people are frightened. People really don't know. They're in a state of uncertainty about what could actually happen. And especially given the things that you've said, it's like, hey, this could really deteriorate quite quickly, especially if those, countries start pulling in their debt and all of that. But you were, on the other hand, were more hopeful, in a more hopeful place. Could you explain to me, so that I can have it when I get off the air with you, that hopeful spot? What helped you be in that hopeful spot when we started the interview?
Well, I think I get from my father and his partly tragic history that when you're confronted by these large developments that you really don't have any control over, particularly not as a person, as an individual, one of the few ways to soothe yourself, to get through it, is to try at least to understand it, to try at least to have that amount of control that comes from knowing what's happening, even if it carries the unfortunate message that if this is what's happening, what little can I do to affect the outcome? This struggle to redefine the world, because, again, as I've told you on many programs, over the last 25 years, the average annual growth of the American economy has been about 2.5%. And over that same period of time, the average growth of the Chinese economy has been between 6 and 8%. You can't do that for 25 years without reorganizing the world. If the biggest country in the world is growing at 1/3 the rate of the second biggest one, that has to be accommodated sooner or later, here or there. It turns out that one of the places where this is being fought out is Ukraine, which means the tensions and the horrors are concentrated there. And my heart, like everybody, goes out to all of the suffering that's going on there. But we're not going to get one step further by being all wrapped up in that horror. We got to take some effort at least to understand what's going on. Maybe then we could have some impact. Maybe if the American people, or at least a significant portion of them, said, hey, if we keep up this way, even if we resolve the Ukraine situation, even if there's a sit down, a ceasefire, a negotiated peace, and they stay neutral or whatever the arrangements might be, there'll be another flashpoint. Because of if you understand what's going on, you will not have solved the problem. It would be better to say, let's sit down and let's accommodate, because that's the only word that it fits. Let's accommodate the world arrangement to the reality of what has happened, which is the world changed from 1989 to now, just like it had changed from 1945 to 1989. But let's do it as conscious human beings. We understand we're avoiding war. We're avoiding Ukraine writ large all over the place. And we want that. You know, Britain tried to stop the United States from becoming an independent country. That's what the Revolutionary War was about. And then the War of 1812, a very few years later, the attempt to once again reestablish British control. After that, because the U.S. defeated Britain twice, it was a deal. Let's sit down and work this out, which proved to be a lot better for both Britain and the United States than a continuous revolutionary war that never stopped, which was the alternative. Okay, let's learn from our history. We got to do that now with the next player.
Richard, do you think that as we accommodate and adjust to what has been called the New World Order, do you think the working class will benefit? I mean, it just seems like we always lose. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about ways that the working class could benefit. I see the fact that maybe we'll have a green energy economy, as you know, because the people who usually suffer from pollution more than other people are sort of the poorer people, the marginalized folks, the working class also as well, you know, with them. Do you think there's any sunny side here for the working people?
Yeah, I think that working people have two great crises they could avoid. One is the headlong disaster that we call ecology, or we call environmentalism, or the climate collapse and all of that. Because let me again remind you, war is a terrible user of fossil fuels and everything else. We're suspending some of the ecological changes we passed in recent years.
I mean, some of the reason for the war is because of fossil fuels. So also, that's a whole nother discussion. We could go for an hour.
They burn more. They make them more valuable by driving up the price. They induce capitalists to invest in more of these fossil fuels. As they do, they put pressure on governments not to interfere with their money making off the fossil fuels. Absolutely. So the working class has to defend itself against the climate disaster. And the working class, let's remember, they're the ones who fight the wars. The soldiers on the ground. And those are working class boys and girls. And they're young. And the people they're killing are mostly working class people because, as you pointed out, those with a bit more money have gotten out of the area, the zones where fighting is going on. So the working class can avoid slaughter in warfare, and it can avoid the climate crisis if it says to the world, hey, look, this is something America and China have in common. They can together avoid the rising temperature. That's what all the climate, Paris Agreement and all, they were about countries coming together to share the costs and the benefits of a dealing with our climate. The same is true of the costs and benefits of readjusting the world. The United States cannot hold on to its dominant world position now that its economic footprint has shrunk relative to China and so on. You can shuffle who plays on which team, but that fundamental change, that's why Germany lost. Germany tried to hold on to a position it had at the end of the 19th century, first in World War I, then again in World War II. But the forces arrayed against them, Britain, the old empire, and America, the new emerging empire, they couldn't do it. And that's the history of Germany. Are we going to have to replay those tragedies now on a global scale with nuclear weapons? That's what we have at stake. And that's why I say let's accommodate to the new world order rather than let it be the burial ground for all of us.
Professor Richard Wolff, As usual, I really appreciate all your insights. My audience really appreciates your insights. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Julianna, really, because I say this to you sometimes, but I say it from my heart even now. This stuff has to be talked about. The costs to us as a people of not doing that are now so enormous that it freaks me out to watch yet another television program talk about sensational death in Ukraine rather than the real issues that tragedy in Ukraine forces us to confront.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You
Take
can find
care.
Professor Wolff on YouTube. His economic update comes out weekly and economically updates us about all the different things that we need to be paying attention to, having those important conversations. Thanks again, Professor Wolff. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're watching actTV. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Again, you can find Professor Wolff at Democracy at Work on Twitter, Democracy at Work on YouTube. You can find actTV across platforms. We have moved to a new time and a longer extended show. We are on Thursdays now at 1 p.m. Set your clocks, set your timing devices, set your alerts on your Facebook or whatever it is you do to find us. We do appreciate your comments. We appreciate your watching, and we hope to see you next week right back here on this same bat time, same bat channel. I'm Julianna Forlano. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.